Okay, so you go ahead and do number 4, and I'll put them up more look at them. So they look like that, except for better. My sine wave is pretty good, my cosine wave is terrible. It's not very wavy, but looks like that. D is a vertical shift, just moves the whole thing up and down. My amplitude didn't change. So above the midline and below the midline is just 1. Y'all good? Okay, so on number 5, we now have 2 transformations to the same graph. And in this case, they both happen to be vertical translations. I have a vertical stretch by 2 and a vertical shift by 1. So my A value is 2. My B value is 1 because there's still an X there. My C value is 0 because there's no horizontal shift, but my D value is 1. Alright, so I've got 2 vertical changes. The stretch happens before the shift. So now you can go ahead and draw your midline, because if you have a plus something or a minus something at the end, it is the new central axis. So I can go ahead and put that in. And so I know, because sine always starts on the central axis, that that's where my first point's going to be.
So you're just really, okay.
Okay, so now my y values are going to change, but my x values again are not, because neither of these transformations are horizontal transformations. So pi over 2, if you want to go back and look at it, it's pi over 2, 1. So now I have to multiply 1 by 2 and then add 1. So it should now be pi over 2, 3. Now if you think about it, this makes sense. Once I found, and just so you guys know, it's whatever is easiest for you. If you want to find critical points and graph all the critical points, then great. Usually what I do is find the central axis and figure out my amplitude. If I can do that, I don't need to do all my critical points. My amplitude is 2, which means it goes 2 up from the central axis and 2 down from the central axis. So here's my central axis. I have to go up 2. I have to come back to the central axis, and then at my next point, I have to go down 2 from it. So that's how I usually graph them. But whatever's easiest for you. Wait a second. And then on my cosine wave, cosine doesn't start on the central axis. It starts an amplitude above the central axis. So I identified my central axis as being 1, and then I know my amplitude is 2. So my cosine wave has to start 2 above that. It doesn't start at 2. It starts 2 above the central axis. Or if you want to do it by critical point, your critical point for cosine is 0, 1. I have to multiply that 1 by 2 and then add 1, which means I should be starting at 3. Everybody good? Okay. Okay, so now we have some horizontal transformations. Take a second, fill in your A, B, C, D. Okay, so now what we have is a horizontal transformation only. It's not a vertical transformation. My A value is 1, my B value is 2, there's no C and no D. Okay, now here's where you have to be just a little bit careful. remember what is with x, what is grouped with x, which this is, grouped with x, is backwards. So it looks like multiply by 2, but you actually divide by 2. Okay, so my first critical point for sine is 0, 0, so it doesn't matter what you do, it's still going to be 0, 0. But the next critical point was half pi 1. Now I'm going to take half pi and divide it by 2. Dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by a half. So if I would have half pi divided by 2, that's the same thing as half pi times 1/2, which makes this pi over 4. So your new x value is pi over 4, 1. So it's going to be right there. Then my next x value was pi, or my next ordered pair was pi 0. But because that horizontal change, I have to divide by 2. So instead of pi, it's now half pi. And then you can probably see the pattern after that. Now that's one completed cycle, but now that you have the pattern, you could complete the curve if you wanted to. You can just keep going. But one cycle's enough. If you get one cycle,